Ja, velkommen alle sammen til en spesialutgave av Henriksen og Selle. I dag har vi besøk av Sharren Haskel, som er Knesset-medlem i Israel. Og vi skal snakke om det som pågår og har skjedd i Israel, og dette vil foregå på engelsk. Sharren, welcome to our podcast, Henriksen and Selle. You are a
Hi,
member
Eric.
of yeah. You're a member of the Knesset. Can you give just a short presentation of yourself? I know you were the youngest member of Knesset. And
I used to be, yeah.
which party are you representing, and where are you on the political landscape from left, center, right?
Okay, so I've been in the parliament in the past 9 years now. I entered as one of the youngest Knesset members during that term, but it's been a long time since then. We have quite a few parliament members who are younger now as well. When I turned 18, I served in the IDF as all Israelis. And I served in a combat position as a combat soldier in the border guards. Um, I've lived in Australia for about 7 years, and I lived for a while in the States before entering politics here in Israel. I started my political road, obviously in the right side of the camp, um, but I've and that was through the party of the Likud party. And after a few years, I've resigned from the Likud party and joined another right party here in Israel. We are called, it's called, how do I translate it? The sort of it's like the right wing camp. Maybe I can describe it sort of like that. Um, and um, and it's been a long road in politics, but it's challenging here in Israel. Most of my career, I sat in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. I've chaired in the past also the Education Committee here in Israel, and I sit in the Finance Committee as well. Most of my work is about economic issues and how to reduce bureaucracy and regulations and taxes here in Israel to make business a little bit easier for us. But as you know, Israel with its security challenges, most of our work are surrounding a discussion of security and foreign affairs. And these are some of the main issues that I really have been dealing with.
So, would it be a correct statement to say that you are social liberal but fiscal and security conservative?
I'm sorry.
Would it be right to say that you are social liberal but fiscal and security conservative?
I think that I would probably be described the best as a classic liberal in the terms of individual liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freedom to make our own choices and decisions, and economical freedom. So reducing as much as possible the government involvement, and giving the citizens the options to make choices, and to make the decisions. And on the security point of view, I am quite hawkish. So I think it really described more the conservative right, with a touch of a sort of not an ancient, but the old classical right, which was the liberal.
That puts you clearly right in the footsteps of John Locke and the founding fathers of America and security for Israel. So
Mhm.
let's go to the topic of the day. I want to start, Sharon, with October 7th. When October 7 happened, the whole world revolted. And then that really quickly almost passed away. So, can you just shortly recapitulate for our viewers what happened in Israel on October 7?
So on October 7, Israel had experienced the worst attack ever in its history. This was thousands of terrorists coming from Gaza, infiltrating Israeli towns and cities, butchering and massacring anyone that comes to their way, no matter whether they're Jewish or not, Muslims or Christians or people from the south or people from the north, women and men or children or elderly. They just went house to house, area to area, and completely cleared it and butchered anyone that came through their path. So, with that kind of event that had happened, understanding the magnitude of it, this was a full on declaration of war on Israel. We did not wanted that. We actually thought that we could converse and come to some kind of solution, or that we can just live side by side in somewhat of a way, but that was completely abrupted, and when Hamas has declared war in Israel. And I think that people in our generation, they don't really understand what war really means. I mean, this is the most barbaric and violent solution, so to say, uh, in a place where conversation didn't brought results, where we couldn't come to any kind of agreement. And so when Hamas opened in that kind of barbaric attack on Israel, that was a declaration of war. And Israel, ever since, has been in a position of defending and protecting its country and its citizens as well. I think that some of the events that had happened there, these were real crimes against humanity. I mean, we know that. The report that came just last week from the United Nations is a full evidence of the crimes against humanity that Hamas has committed against Israelis and against Israeli women in particular. They have turned sexual violence into a weapon of war in a very mechanic and organized way, pre-planned in advance with instructions, um, and the full evidence that are surrounding that, and the reports that are coming out, and the forensic evidence um, are, are really a testimony for such a tragedy that we've actually experienced here in Israel.
I just want to emphasize to our viewers that I've been to Israel 3 times since October 7. We have walked together in some of these communities that the Hamas terrorists and civilians committed their atrocities. I've also seen the video compilement that Israel has put together of footage from what happened. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's fair to say that an evil like what was exposed on October 7th, I don't know if I've ever seen it before. You have to go back to maybe the genocide in Rwanda. I don't think even the Nazis were as vile as what happened on October 7th. Torture, rape, burning alive, and all of that that stuff. And so let's
So
take it.
I'll just say, it's not a competition, and obviously the tragedy of the Jewish people during the Holocaust and the crimes against humanity that the Nazis did have their place. But in the terms of what had happened on the 7th of October, these are crimes that no human can actually think about or describe. I mean, it is so tough that even people who had so much experience in disastrous areas and war zones, They've never seen anything like that. And it was planned, organized in advance, like a machine, funded and trained by Iran. This is an army of Iran doing their biddings, doing what they're telling them to do exactly. So, yeah, it's a full tragedy that no one could ever imagine.
And then after this horrendous weekend, over 200 hostages, women, children, elderly, civilians, soldiers were taken hostages to Gaza. So, can you just give us a status on how many are still hostages and what are they going through and what have they
So
gone
yeah,
through?
so on the day there were more than 250 people who were, they were kidnapped from their beds in the morning on the high holiday. And they were kidnapped in trucks, on donkeys, on bicycles, on motorcycles, in cars, in trunks, being taken like cattle into Gaza. They were held and are still being held in horrible conditions. I mean, they're going through a torture, through sexual violence, sexual abuse, no food, no water, no medication. Some people are in critical need of care and medications and are not receiving any medical treatment as they should. Um, After the first release package, there are still more than 130 hostages that are still being kept in Gaza, including babies and children and women and elderly who really needs an urgent medical treatment.
And then, in addition, what I assume a lot of people in the Western world really doesn't comprehend is that you have been exposed to rocket fire, rocket barrages from Hamas, from Gaza, and from Lebanon, Hezbollah, continuously since October 7th.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been attacked through the south from Hamas with thousands of rockets that were launched at us. We've been attacked from the north by Hezbollah, both of them armies of Iran, brigades or battalions of Iran. And we've actually been attacked from our Syrian border as well. And to be honest, we actually been attacked from the south as well, through rockets that are being shot from Yemen, from the Houthis. We actually were able to intercept most of them, but we are still being attacked through that border as well. So there's a few fronts. They're not just attacking Israel, but they're also attacking the international community. I mean, they've attacked so many American bases. American soldiers and troops have lost their lives. They've been attacking commercial ships from around the world, from European countries as well. Iran is not just provoking Israel, but the entire world.
Yes, and Iran has also directly targeted fired at Kurdish targets in southern Kurdistan. So this is what we are seeing is much more than Hamas Israel. This is a regional war that Iran has put in motion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if history is going to look back, this will be described as the first days of the war with Iran.
Okay, so we have established some facts of what happened from October 7 and up to today. A terrible war crime, horrific, evil, despicable actions were done. Rockets have been fired, and hostages are still in Gaza in terrible conditions. So then Israel went into Gaza to take out Hamas, and that's on the fifth month. And I want just to, can you say a little bit about, because in the streets in the Western world, people are marching and talking about genocide in Gaza. The Hamas
Yeah.
health authorities in Gaza says that 31,000 people have died. According to them, no Hamas soldier has been killed, but IDF reports 12, 13,000 Hamas soldiers. That's a ratio of one operator, one terrorist, one soldier per two civilians, approximately. That is the lowest ratio, combat to civilian, that any army has fought in the world. The normal is 1 to 9. So, what's your
Yeah.
response to the claim that there is Israel is perpetrating genocide in Gaza right now?
So I'll say a few things. Hamas is a terrorist, radical, Islamist, a murderous cult that is like ISIS. You cannot negotiate with ISIS. ISIS had to be eliminated the same as Hamas has to be eliminated. It's not easy. You're fighting a murderous ideology of radical Islam, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time mainly because we do not want innocent civilians to be harmed in the process of trying to eliminate a terrorist group that is not just, you know, doesn't just not care for Israelis and the lives of Israelis, but Hamas doesn't really care for the lives of the Palestinians as well. And in order to eliminate this terrorist organization, we need time. And a war is never a pretty sight, and a war is never something that can look nice. Okay, this is a barbaric act of violence, and we are now going through it because we have to protect our families and friends and community and nation after we were brutally attacked. And Hamas is not just a regular army, but they are hiding behind innocent civilians and population. I mean, if they wouldn't hide underneath hospitals and schools and churches and mosques and put their military bases in highly dense and populated area, then there wouldn't be so many casualties as well. I mean, you are right that if we look on other conflicts, this is the lowest ratio of death of innocent civilians in comparison to the militant group or the enemies. Okay, but we still mourn any loss of life. You know that wasn't necessary because this is who Israel really is. We have a very high standards in moral and code that we operate by, including canceling military operations because the need or the fact that we want not to harm innocent lives. But unfortunately, as Hamas is using that and know that we act by these moral codes, they actually try and set traps for the IDF and for the soldiers who are there by these. For example, going and waving white flags and saying, oh, these are innocent civilians walking through. And then suddenly, two armed men with rifles and RPGs are shooting straight at the forces. So there's many events like this where they're actually trying to set traps for the IDF, using the fact that the IDF is merciful and does not want to harm any innocent civilians, and using it against them. And that makes the scene far more complicated.
And
So,
also, if you have 2.2 million residents in Gaza, and let's say there are around 17, 18,000 civilians uh, died in 5 months of battle where Hamas is putting them in harm's way, that has no resemblance to genocide at all. That's actually astonishing low number from an army fighting. a force that is hiding behind civilians. I just want to, I don't
Absolutely,
want,
but I want to say one more thing that we're probably and the fact is that most likely at least a third of those casualties are probably at the hand of Hamas. I mean, they were shooting innocent civilians who were trying to flee from the north to the south. They put snipers on roof and Hamas shot innocent Palestinians and children. I mean, when you see Palestinians going, trying to get the food and the water, the humanitarian aid that is coming, Hamas is shooting civilians, women, and children. I mean, they placed rocket launchers in hospitals and schools. Some of them were faulty, and it's actually Hamas missiles that killed many of these children and women and men. And so you need to understand that this ratio that we're talking about would probably drop down, my estimation would probably be half. So 1 in 2 person if Hamas won't murder their own people as well.
I got reports today that Israel has discussed putting in heads of families and heads of clans to help govern Gaza after Hamas. And now Hamas has started killing heads of families and clans in Gaza to avoid to take out the leadership that can take care of the people after Hamas is gone. Is that something that you have heard as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, Hamas still is in main control in Gaza, mainly because Hamas has taken over UNRWA. Hamas people are literally running UNRWA, and they put enough pressure on the United Nations and other organizations not to come in so that they won't be replaced. So as long as UNRWA is in control, that means civilianly that Hamas is in control. And the fact that there were may have been some discussions with head of tribes in order to try and find different leadership that will be able to take a responsible leadership over their people. And Hamas just completely, they just murdered them. They marched them down the street and murdered them in the attempt of accusing them of treason. Okay, we've seen that before as well. We've seen people who have demonstrated against Hamas who were executed as well. And so there's a big fear in Gaza from them as well. I mean, this is a terrorist organization that is in full control over a huge amount of civilians and a huge population.
That brings us to UNRWA, which is the main thing I wanted to discuss with you today. European nation states and the EU has stopped funding of UNRWA. The Norwegian government has increased its support, financial support for UNRWA and Portugal. Can you give short what is UNRWA and what is your what are there what has happened in UNRWA relating to Hamas and Gaza, and what is your message to the Norwegian government?
Okay, so I'll start with the message, and it means that Norwegian people, Norwegian taxpayers who work very hard for their money, are funding a terrorist organization, Hamas. That's what it really means. I know that many Norwegians are very sensitive to the issues of humanitarian aid, and I totally accept and understand the high level of moral that Norway is trying to set rightfully. I mean, we want humanitarian aid to reach Palestinians. But what Norwegians don't understand is that it doesn't matter how much you will contribute to UNRWA, this humanitarian aid will not reach Palestinians. And so it's not just that it's not effective, but it's actually keeping children in Gaza hungry and without any clean water. If Norway would have addressed all of these funds through the World Health Food Organization or UNICEF or any other organization that is very experienced and know how to give real humanitarian aid, then the humanitarian crisis wouldn't have happened as it is. The main issue is that there isn't trucks that want to go in as well. I mean, the first part of it is that as soon as trucks are coming in, they're being attacked, being targeted in their life. Some of them have actually lost their life. The easiest one is just to lose your truck, but the other thing is to lose your life. And so there aren't many people or facility to actually send the trucks in. The second one is that as soon as the humanitarian aid trucks do come in, you see Hamas is taking over this and is stealing most of the humanitarian aid. If you just go through images from the markets in Gaza during Ramadan now, you will see shelves full of food and merchandise. This is the humanitarian aid merchandise, but it's not being distributed. It's being sold. And it's being sold by Hamas to merchants. And that's how Hamas is, first of all, profiting. It's profiting money by selling the humanitarian goods and aid. And it's profiting from a campaign of hungry Palestinian children that don't have access to food. And therefore, the international community will go and send more humanitarian aid and more money. So they're actually profiting twice from that. Now, UNRWA is an organization that is parallel to what a government is doing. This is not a real refugee organization. UNHCR, the United Nations organization, is a real refugee organization that really assists refugees and find long-term solutions to refugees around the world. And what Norwegian needs to understand is that the definition of refugees worldwide is different from the definition of a Palestinian refugee. That's why UNRWA, as a sort of a refugee organization for Palestinians, is a completely different organization. I mean, if Palestinians would need to go on the UNHCR definition of a refugee, almost none of them will be refugees. You know what? Maybe 30, 40,000 of them would be considered refugees. Definitely not more than 6 million, 7 million Palestinians. The reason is because Palestinians are actually profiting and receive a social care package from that status. It means that they receive from the international community housing. And I'm not talking about tents. I'm speaking about villas, about apartments and skyscrapers. UNRWA is literally building and distributing those facilities. So you receive an apartment. You receive a education system for your children completely free of charge. I mean, who won't want a fully paid education system for free, paid by the international community for your children? Their entire health system is all based on UNRWA. So they receive medical treatment, some medical care that even the Americans don't receive if you don't have any private insurance. So you get that healthcare system that is fully funded by the international community. And I can go on and go on up to the point of street cleaners and the sewage system and the infrastructures that they're all paid by the international community. So when I say UNRWA is a government-like facility and organization for Palestinians paid by the international community, that's what it actually means. So there's no incentive of not being a Palestinian refugee because your children inherit that status. It means that fourth and fifth generation were placed, they have citizenships in many places, they have funds and everything. They are still considered Palestinian refugee. It means that a Palestinian marry a foreigner from Norway or France and they go and live in Gaza. that foreigner, that Norwegian or that French woman who married a Palestinian can get the Palestinian refugee status. It means that adopted children and so on and so on and so on. And when you really understand the picture, how UNRWA is part of the problem and not part of the solution, it doesn't give a long-term solution. It perpetuates the conflicts. It's stopping us from achieving a real and long-lasting agreement with the Palestinian by perpetuating this crazy idea that one day the entire state of Israel will be eliminated because it will be flooded with Palestinians by armed and force. That's what UNRWA's right of return, Palestinian refugee, is literally says and perpetuated. You understand that UNRWA is really part of the problem. And I didn't even got to talk about how the education system that you pay for, the international community pay for, is actually an Islamist, radical Islamist education system that teaches them death and violence and hatred, and how the employees of the United Nations are literally Hamas military wing. Many of them participated in the 7th of October's attacks, or in some way or another, okay? Using their immunity and their facilities, United Nations facilities who have immunity as military bases for Hamas, hiding in those facilities bunkers with ammunition and rocket launchers. Hamas is not just a few rotten apples. Hamas is rotten to its core. And as long as it exists, there won't be a better future, not for Israelis and not for Palestinians. And Norwegian needs to understand that the more money you send to this organization, the more money you send to the problem and not the solution. You do not send a dime for humanitarian aid. You pay for paychecks for Hamas military wing. You pay for paychecks and humanitarian aid being sold to Palestinians. You want to contribute to humanitarian aid? Contribute that to the World Food Program, to UNICEF, to any other organization that can actually assist in there.
I don't think a lot of people know what you have been describing. UNRWA is perceived as a refugee organization, and they think it's like UNHCR. UNHCR is handling every single
No.
refugee problem in the world by a definition that, as you accurately states, they solve it. UNRWA is actually created to escalate conflict. So I think that
So
was
UNRWA didn't integrate a single Palestinian refugee. On the contrary, it just created more and more refugees. If UNHCR would take charge of the Palestinian issue, the world probably would have been a better place. The future of Israelis and Palestinians would have been probably a more peaceful one and a more tolerant one.
and we see that UNRWA has been infiltrated by Hamas and has been working side by side and integrated with Hamas in these atrocities. Is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't hear that, Mike.
And we have seen how you have documentation that UNRWA has been abused by Hamas, and people in UNRWA are Hamas people, and they are part of these atrocities that we now have seen, including keeping hostages.
Absolutely. We have evidence that UNRWA workers, United Nations workers, have held in their home hostages and abused them. We have full evidence and proof of, of UNRWA workers participating in the 7th of October massacres, including kidnapping bodies. We have that on tape, we have that videoed, all the evidence needed. UNRWA is turning a blind eye on the real issue and the real problem that exists there. We have full evidence to all of that. We've had that for years, but the United Nations had turned a blind eye over and over again.
Sharon, I want to ask you about FIFA Hospital in particular and hospitals in general. There is rage in the streets here because it is accused Israel of breaking international law for putting the war to the hospitals. What exactly is happening in Shifa Hospital, and why is IDF going in there, and how are they doing it?
So all the staff that works there, including managers, are well aware, and it's a very known fact of anyone that works there, that Hamas has taken over parts of the hospitals. Okay? Those are places where Hamas have literally built their main headquarters because of international law. When Hamas actually broke international law and you use these places as military bases, as ammunition bunkers, as places to send and operate rocket launchers from there, they have broken international law. And that gives us a legal right to operate in this area to make sure that actual patients are not being compromised by Hamas. We have given a well ahead notice and warning before entering those areas. We know that it actually gave a warning to Hamas as well to flee from there, but we were willing to take the risk so that we don't risk any innocent civilian life. Unfortunately, Hamas is forcing some of these patients to stay and actually shoot people who don't want to listen to them and actually flee out. So, when you understand the bigger picture and how Hamas, there's hundreds of Hamas military wing that were relocated at the Shifa hospital. Okay? We saw some of the headquarters underneath the headquarters of UNRWA. Hamas headquarters was operating underneath the headquarters of UNRWA, taking from UNRWA electricity and water and cover. And this is, you need to understand, by the law of immunity that those facilities have as United Nations facility, the people who work there isn't a chance they were not aware and did not know that Hamas has taken over the area. And so when UN breaks neutrality, when the United Nations is violating laws of war, then it gives us a reason why to operate in this area. So we didn't just barge in, and we try not to harm anyone. We gave enough notice ahead, even though it harmed the military operation. But we are working in full legal right and making sure that the least casualties possible are being harmed.
Yeah, we have documentation back from the operation in Jenin many years ago that Israel actually lost soldiers in the effort to protect civilians, Arab civilians in Jenin. And that seems to be the modus operandi of the IDF, that you take big risks on losing lives of soldiers to protect enemy, the civilian population that Hamas and the other terrorist organizations are hiding behind.
Yeah, and this is not a normal situation. Okay, it's really not a normal situation. No other army and no other country would have gone to such a length. And to be honest, we shouldn't risk our soldier. This was a mistaken judgment. At the same time, we have constantly and have always been held to a different standard and different moral than the entire rest of the world. It's not because of the love for Palestinians, but it is because the hatred towards Jews. It is because the hatred towards the only Jewish nation and Jewish country in the world. This is pure, ancient anti Semitism that we see the rise of all around the world. Am I surprised? Absolutely not. We knew that, and I'm really saddened and heartbroken that it actually erupted. But, this is not a new surprise to us.
Sharren, I want to talk briefly about International Red Cross. The International Red Cross is visiting families of terrorist, convicted murderers, and criminals in Israeli prisons, and also visiting those people in prison. What have you seen or heard of the Red Cross relating to the innocent civilian hostages in Gaza? We have seen and heard testimonies now of they are exposed to starvation, to torture, to sexual abuse. What has the International Red Cross done to put pressure on Hamas to get access to the hostages?
Absolutely nothing, Eric, but absolutely nothing. They have the means to pressure in order to make sure they receive a visit. Packages of medications that were meant to be sent to them were found in the headquarters of Hamas. They were never sent, they were never received. So the Red Cross has done nothing for Israel and has done nothing for more than 250 hostages that are being abused and tortured every single day.
That's a profound reality for anyone wanting to have an opinion about what's going on. The double standards here is astonishing. After the civil war in Bosnia, there were created international criminal courts specifically for for that war. And have you had has Israel heard anything from the UN General Assembly or Security Council to hold Hamas accountable for the war criminal acts October 7, or pressure on Hamas to release the hostages?
So unfortunately, even after the report that was written on weaponizing violence against women by Hamas against Israeli women, even that wasn't discussed in the General Assembly. And the Secretary of the United Nations was pushing back and not willing to actually really create a discussion surrounding that. It is a disappointment and really a tag of shame on the United Nations. This is the most useless organization in the world. Instead of creating world peace and a better place for all of us, it has created a structure to cover up for dictators and tyrants and radical extremists. Mine.
Sharon, I want to ask you today, Secretary of State in the US,
Sorry.
that's okay. Anthony Blinken, US is pushing for an immediate temporary ceasefire, which means unconditional ceasefire, meaning that Israel has to stop its operation in Gaza. What will
Well,
that mean? Why do they do that? And what does it mean for Israel to implement an unconditional ceasefire?
okay, just 1 second. So, I mean, there could have been a ceasefire like 2 months ago, last month, and so many other points in time. But unfortunately, Hamas is refusing to release our hostages. As soon as our hostages will be released, there will be a ceasefire. And until then, we shouldn't have any kind of ceasefire. Hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. Okay. So until the ceasefire until our hostages are being released, there will not be any kind of ceasefire. The ceasefire could have been a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago as well. Hamas refused to release their hostages. As soon as that will happen, our family members, our babies, our brothers and sisters will be released. That's when there's going to be a ceasefire. There is no right for any country to put pressure on Israel for a ceasefire beforehand, unless they can assure us that we will get back our family members.
Sharon, I know you have a lot on your plate. I want to conclude by just asking about the north. 80,000 Israeli civilians have been evacuated from their homes in the north in 5 months now. Hezbollah has been shooting rockets continuously towards Israel from southern Lebanon. What is your take on the situation? First of all, Hezbollah has destroyed Lebanon, are harassing Christians in South Lebanon, and firing on Israel. What is your take on the situation in the north?
So Hezbollah has created complete chaos in Lebanon. I mean, Hezbollah is behind one of the biggest, killing event in Lebanon just a few years ago with a huge explosion at the port. And Hezbollah has created the biggest political turmoil and instability in Lebanon's history. Hezbollah is also behind the huge economical crisis of Lebanese, where they lost all of their money and all of their value of profits or anything that they saved for their entire life. Hezbollah has completely destroyed Lebanon, and it now seeks to destroy Israel as well. I mean, we've been in conflict throughout the years, but Hezbollah is not a Lebanese organization. Hezbollah is an Iranian organization that's operating, funded, and getting its order from Iran. And that's why they don't care for the lives of Lebanese as much as they don't care for the lives of Israelis. They have put our citizens at risk. We have more than 80,000 refugees displaced from their homes, okay, that are, that wants to go back to their day-to-day life, to their routine life. And it is impossible because every single day there are rockets and shootings from that border into, homes of innocent civilians. And so I believe that that will heat up. And we are trying to find a diplomatic solution. But unfortunately, it's been, 5 months without a diplomatic solution. Why doesn't the international community put enough pressure on Lebanon on that front as well? What, only when Israel will actually go in to defend itself against those attacks, that's when the international community will stand up and make a cry out for ceasefire, for stopping of the aggression? You have the opportunity now. Use it. If we go into war, this is to destroy Hezbollah. There will not be stopping. It will not be pretty. We do not want to turn Beirut into Jabalia or Khan Yunis. We do not want. That's why we give the opportunity of months for diplomatic solution. If it will not come, we will be forced into another conflict in order to defend our people and our communities. And I can bet now, Eric, don't be surprised later. And you can take my word for it. Anyone that listens to us is not going to be surprised. As soon as Israel will act in self-defense to defend our people and our community, suddenly the international community will wake up and will call Israel for a ceasefire.
That's what has happened in every single war of aggression that Israel has been exposed to. When Israel gets the upper hand, the international community calls for a ceasefire. Sharren Haskel, I want to thank you for joining our podcast today. I think we can sum it up addressing the violent so-called pro-Palestinian demonstration in our streets. You are not
Mhm.
actually helping the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Are actually upholding suffering both for the Israeli side and the people of Gaza. There is no genocide going on in Gaza. There are no Israeli war crimes going on in Gaza relating to going into Shifa Hospital and other hospitals to take out Hamas leaders. And if the international community really wants peace, they should put pressure on Hamas to release every single hostage, and the international community must create an international war tribunal to hold the people behind and doing the October 7 massacres accountable. That will bring peace very quickly to this region. Is that a fair assessment, Sharon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say more than that. I see people marching in the streets in Norway, in so many cities, calling for intifada, calling for an uprising, calling, saying any means necessary. What does that mean? That means war. They are marching down the streets and calling for war. Well, you know what? We are at war. Okay, this is the result of a war. Both sides are actually losing lives. Okay, Israel didn't want to be there. If you march down the streets and you want a better future, go and call for peace. Go and call for the release of the hostages. Go and call for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians. When you walk and you march with violent slogans, that's what it means. Those images that you see today.
Sharon, why do you think there are no demonstration allowed in the Arab countries? And this is really mostly happening in Western countries.
Because those are mainly radical Islamist groups. Okay? I mean, there are some demonstrations, but they're being tried, they try to get them to die down as well. So you see some in Jordan where they don't really have control of their population. You've seen a few in Egypt as well. Um, but I think that after the act, the barbaric act, when Hamas is committing crimes against humanity, saying that they do that in the name of Islam, calling for the rest of the Arab world to join in, I think the Arab world is starting to wake up. I think it's waking up even quicker than what Western democracy have woken up. I mean, the reality in Israel is that we are fighting radical Islam. Eric, this is knocking on your front door for a while now, okay? And Europeans are sleeping and they're not aware of what's happening in their backyard right now. But it's not staying in the backyard, it's coming to the front, to your front door, and it's knocking on your door. If we're not going to fight together that murderous ideology of radical Islam, our communities, our values, our religions, our cultures, the things that we believe in, that is part of our identity, will be gone in the future.
What does it mean when radical Muslims, immigrants in Europe, America, Canada shouts Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea? What does that actually say?
Well, that means a complete annihilation of the state of Israel, murdering every single Jew. This means that the entire land will be free of Jews. Okay? It means genocide. Now, it's hilarious to see some of these women's rights organization, LGBTQ communities marching with these slogans, because if they would dare to march like that in Iran or Syria or Lebanon or even Jordan, they're either going to be imprisoned or they're going to be hanged from the tallest tree. Women are fighting in this world for their liberties, for their rights. And feminist organizations have the audacity to march for those dictators, those terrorist groups who are literally murdering them and executing them.
So when these people are marching in our streets and shouting against genocide in Gaza, and then shouting Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea, number one, they are shouting a lie because there's no genocide in Gaza. Secondly, they are themselves shouting, calling on genocide.
Yes, absolutely.
Sharren, we are in dark times, but I thank you for joining our podcast. And
Yeah.
we pray and we hope and we know that eventually truth and righteousness will prevail. I wish you the best.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you very much, Eric. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all the listeners.
Thank you.